my voice. Okay, I'm getting some confirmation, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So, I might mention this again as more people join, but I did just want to start by saying I put out a request for topics this time in the messages yesterday. Yeah, that's helpful, Amy. I think that's what's going on. That's okay. I just might not see you all's questions until like later in what I'm saying. I don't know. Okay, so yeah, just wanted to start by saying I sent out those kind of like topic inspirations via message because those are things that I really want to talk about this month. I've been a little bit quiet the past month because these are things that I've been really thinking deeply about, because it kind of feels like they're things in herbalism that are almost reaching a crisis point. So I feel like an intense desire and duty to discuss them, but I wanted to really gather the right words before I did, and I'm feeling there. So I'm really glad that it sparked some awesome questions from a few folks. But I wanted to also say I might not get to all of the questions regarding cultural appropriation of wildcrafting and just sort of sustainable business practices in this live Q&A, but I will be releasing some videos on those exact topics really soon. I'm having a homemade pizza party tonight with my boys, so I'm going to try really, really hard not to let this one be 2 hours long. So I'm going to get going. All right, so as usual, I'm going to start with my tier 3 and 4 questions. So the first question is immune support and antiviral herbal supplements for someone with autoimmune issues. Any books or resources? Immunomodulating herbs. What about elderberry syrup? So this is a very specific situation because folks without autoimmunity can utilize antiviral herbs, which are really incredible. The way antiviral herbs work is spectacular. Body from things that are happening like COVID right now. But people with autoimmunity who are even more at risk to these types of things can't simply take these antiviral herbs because they're incredibly stimulating. So the person who asked this question was right by mentioning immunomodulating herbs, because that's really the main category that we're going to want to utilize for folks with autoimmunity issues. So let's see. Oh, and they asked about elderberry syrup. It is recommended that folks with autoimmunity avoid elderberry because it is incredibly stimulating. Some folks try it anyways and can use it. But it's recommended to avoid it. So when we made our herbal offerings for COVID in March, most of the formulas that I made then were things that folks with autoimmunity could take, and they are immunomodulating herbs, because when you are protecting yourself from a virus, like let's say the flu virus. All right, I got a message about lagging. I'm gonna check my internet. Alright, I think I just corrected the internet issues, but please let me know if it continues to lag, but I'm going to dive right back in where I was. So, So immunomodulating herbs are wonderful because they are typically tonic herbs. They're also typically adaptogen herbs. So you can take them for longer periods of time, whereas the highly stimulating antiviral herbs, you really only want to take for a short amount of time or very intermittently so as to not disrupt your body's own response systems. So immunomodulating herbs, just to give you a few examples, I wrote down here, medicinal mushrooms are incredible. And so we've got a few in this category. We've got cordyceps mushroom and reishi mushroom would be some of my absolute top choices for long-term immune support. Also, we've got eleuthero root and holy basil, some of my favorite herbs. Those are in our brain fog formula, as well as rhodiola root, which is also an immunomodulating herbs. There's quite a few others out there, but those are going to be your really heavy hitters that just help to support and protect the body without disrupting your immune system's response that it needs to be strengthening and working on too. We don't want to just band-aid that over. So let's see what else I've got here. So immunomodulating herbs have, because they're tonic adaptogen herbs, they're working by supporting the body, like I mentioned, and specifically what they're doing is supporting the nervous system and the endocrine system. And okay. And sorry, whenever I do that, I'm just checking your messages. My internet is horrible, as most of you know, so I just want to make sure I'm not speed blabbing and then it's all gone. So because they help support those systems of the body, what's happening is they're helping your body's stress response systems. So what is like the classic time that we get colds? When we are overworked, like maybe we've worked long hours in a day, or we've worked overtime that week, or we just really overexerted ourselves, then we get a cold and we're totally not surprised. So having those adaptogen, tonic, immunomodulating herbs is wonderful for folks that have that happen often, because they're helping your body's stress response become stronger. Therefore, when you have those weekends every now and then where you really overdo it, or those weeks where you overdo it, you won't get sick every time. You know what I mean? So before I move on to the next question, I'm going to answer one in the comment section. Can I ferment elderberries to make them edible, or do they need to be cooked? You absolutely can ferment them. This is something I talk about a lot. A lot of times when herbs, mushrooms have toxic properties when eaten raw, cooking is, of course, the easiest way to get rid of them. Sometimes ice cold water helps to get rid of some of those toxins and make it a little more tolerable. And sometimes fermenting is wonderful. So, for example, we make elderberry wine every year. And how we do that is by harvesting the fresh berries when they're really juicy and ripe. We juice the berries, and then we add sugar and let them ferment in the sugar. So the wild yeast from the elderberries and the sugars marry and they ferment. And so first you'll get an elderberry soda, then it will slowly turn into wine. And if you let it go even past that, it'll turn into a vinegar. So yes, you can absolutely, fermenting them will help. Another good example is adding raw elderberries to honey. I recommend making a fermented elderberry honey, which if those berries are really ripe and juicy and wet, that honey is naturally going to ferment anyways. Alright, next question. I'm getting quite a few messages from YouTube saying that the streaming is not, so y'all let me know if it's bad. I'm gonna text my husband and ask him to disconnect real quick. Can you disconnect from the internet? Alright. I'm gonna move on to the next question. I would love to hear about what the best practice is for businesses that offer ingested products. I've been looking to purchase insurance, but I get confused with all the different types offered. Do you have information on this or opinions from personal experience? So, in response to this person, I did mention, and just want to mention here as well, that I have a video on my Instagram TV channel about good manufacturing processes, or GMPs, and I cover a lot of what you need to do in order to sell ingestible products. But specifically about the insurance, the reason you're seeing multiple options is because there are multiple options. For example, insurance for supplement companies who make really strong claims about, like, this is a laxative tea or this is an immune system tonic, are going to need entirely different insurance than people who are just selling vitamins, for example. And then powdered supplements are going to be entirely different than people selling an alcoholic tincture. And those are going to be incredibly different from folks that are just selling natural skincare. The two main things that you need to know is that as an herbal product business, you need two types of insurance. One of them is product insurance. That's definitely the most complicated process, where you're handing over your recipes, the ingredients. They need all of the information about your processes, etc., so that they can feel comfortable insuring you. It's pretty hard to get product insurance. What some people will do, and I did this in the beginning too, is just get product insurance for some of their products, like salves, body oils, teas, things that are a little easier to insure. And then the other insurance that you need is just a general liability for your business. This covers things like if you were to do a booth at a farmer's market and your tent were to fly away and hit somebody's car window, or any sort of stuff that might happen under the umbrella of your business name. So general liability and product insurance. And what I would recommend to anyone looking to start a product business is to get involved with the Indie Business Network. They offer insurance, but they also have a membership with forums and all kinds of things where they have they give you a lot of advice on this type of stuff. So the next question is a great question. I know some of you are here in Tennessee with me, where the humidity is 200% right now. It was almost 100 yesterday. We're in like the official dog days of summer. And the next question was herbal support for heat exhaustion. I've had 2 people close to me recently have pretty severe effects after being out in the summer sun and working all day in the heat. So to me, the most important thing for folks who either work in the sun and the heat all day every day, like farmers, or folks who aren't used to being in the heat and the sun and they know they're gonna be spending a day in direct sunlight, is an herbal infusion. So anytime we're going out for the day, I make a big herbal infusion the night before, and I chill it in the refrigerator. And I might drink it straight or add a little. Either way, it's in my big water bottle, chilled and ready to go, so I can sip on it all day long in the heat. And I'll get into the ingredients that I like to rotate in there, but another really, really great recipe, and we have a few videos on this actually, is making switchel or haymaker's punch. That is one of the best things you can drink in the summer. It is full of vitamins and minerals. It's a very cooling from the inside out beverage, and it's something that's been used historically in the South, from folks picking cotton and trying to figure out how to cool the hell off. And traditionally that recipe is fresh ginger. It can be chopped ginger or ginger juice, honey, molasses, and water. Oh, and apple cider vinegar. You can add or take away things, but that is the classic core recipe, is apple cider vinegar, molasses, honey, ginger. I'm actually releasing next month, when we have our release next, a switchel concentrate. because typically when you're making it at home, you add water to it a lot more. It's more water than it is those things. It'd be pretty hard to drink straight molasses. So I'm making a Haymaker's Punch Switchel concentrate that's got a ton of other herbs in it that are really, really great for just cleansing the body, keeping all the systems moving, and it's also super delicious. So I'm really excited about that. So to get back to the infusions, let me read what I've got here. So my two favorite recipes for infusions in the summer is our brain fog tea, which is incredibly cooling. It's got several cooling herbs in it, and that is sheerly by coincidence. Eleuthero root or Siberian ginseng is a really wonderful herb for helping to cool down the organs. So it helps cool down the inside of the body. That tea's also got lemongrass, calendula, and mint, and those are also recommended for cooling things down. And then a new favorite for the summer heat, which all of you tier 3 and 4 folks received last month as your gift, was a mountain mint Monarda tea. And whatever other ingredients are in there is great and is, not as important, but mountain mint is a really nice mint, but really you could use any mints near you, and bee balm or Monarda, 2 very cooling herbs, and I've been enjoying that chilled, and I actually got lots of messages from you all without me even saying that I was using it in that way, that you all had been enjoying it chilled as well. So another really great herb is sage. Sage is very, very, very cooling to the body. So, or not so much cooling, it helps with sweating. Sorry, let me rephrase that. It is a really great herb for people who sweat a lot in the sun and in the heat. So that might be one that you want to incorporate in there as well if you are someone that's just dripping. So some other herbs that I wrote down would be my absolute top choices, both for internal and external preparations for pulling heat from the surface of the skin and helping to cool things off internally. Plantain, absolute number 1. Violet is the best cooling herb. We make it in lemonades when it's out. It's in our cooling pine tallow salve. That's where that came from. Calendula and cornflower or bachelor buttons and chamomile. These are nice, light, cooling herbs. So we have an after sun spray that we make that I think I'm going to be phasing out, but that's okay. You guys can make it at home, that has most of those herbs I just mentioned infused into aloe vera and witch hazel. And it is amazing when you come home sunburned and you spray that on your skin. You can literally feel the heat being drawn out into the surface of the skin. It's quite amazing. Alright, we're getting into some big questions here, so buckle up. I feel called to start an herbal products business, and I'm getting hung up on this thought. I know that everyone is different, and using herbs that nourish your constitution is very beneficial. How do you honor that knowledge, but also sell products that everyone can use and benefit from? Is it all in balancing the formula of the offerings, or educating your customers on the products? So this is a great question, and we have another similar question that comes, I'll read it after this one just to not get too far off track here. So my personal answer is both. However, there are lots of people who really choose one or the other. A great example is Ayurveda. Ayurvedic medicine focused on the doshas, which are essentially the energetics and constitutions that are dominant in each person's body, and using opposite herbs of those energetics. So I know I say this a lot, but I've never recorded an online class, so it's taken a long time, but one day I will upload my herbal energetics class where we get all into this stuff. But bear with me, and I'll pull this back all around. So I want to make sure I don't miss anything here. So most of my tinctures and formulas are balanced and less specific to constitutions and more focused on specific organs or emotional states. The same goes for my salves and teas. Most of my items are what I would consider action focused. Medicine is my personal passion, so making salves for specific ailments like eczema and psoriasis, which are hot ailments in nature, salves for drawing out infection and splinters, etc. Same with my teas. One is for brain fog, one is for sleep, one is for PMS, and one is for deplenishing mineral levels. So just to trail off on that a bit, what I'm saying there is, rather than my offerings being specific to a person's constitution and energetics, my offerings are more focused on general ailments that anyone could experience no matter their energetic, and therefore I'm creating balanced formulas that anyone can take without irritating other systems of the body that specifically address that ailment. So I use that example of eczema and psoriasis because I'm Vata, I'm cool and dry in nature, but I might have eczema or psoriasis, which is a very hot, irritated, swollen, flaky, scratchy thing no matter who you are. So I'm going to recommend my cooling pine tallow balm that's got the antimicrobial properties of the pine sap and the cooling properties of the violet and St. John's wort. And that's what I'm trying to say. I hope that makes sense. Whereas if you're working one-on-one with someone, which I did used to do this with very specific clients, you might focus a little bit more on their constitution and energetics. For example, if someone comes to me with an injury or pain and they want to take a tincture for pain, we're definitely going to want to know if their pain is hot and inflamed, or if it's more on the like arthritis side where it's more of like a cool, dull, creaky joint pain type thing. If someone has got hot, inflamed pain, the absolute last thing that we want to put on that is like turmeric, black pepper, cayenne, prickly ash. Whereas those things would work incredibly well for someone with that more cool, dull, arthritic pain. And then for someone with that hot, inflamed pain, we're going to want to use more like cooling, anti-inflammatory herbs. Let's see what else I've got here. On the other hand, and I liked that this person asked, do you educate your customers? On the other hand, I used to make Abhyanga oils, which is an Ayurvedic idea of making body oils specific to the doshas and what nourishment they need based on their constitutions, and I'm getting ready to re-release those oils as 4 elemental oils. And so I will be making an oil that's more for wet, hot constitution, one for wet, dry constitution, one for cool and hot, cool and dry. Does that make sense? In which case, yes, you as the customer see, okay, there's 4 body oils. Which one do I buy? Well, you have 4 options that each have their own descriptions that go into great detail about who they're best for. And so that would be a great example of educating the customer on a specific energetic constitution of a product. Whereas my bitters formula, anyone could take. It's not super cooling or heating. It's a very general thing for folks to take. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense. So that said, I make my pain tincture Nerve Swerve, and that is a very balanced formula. There are not any super irritating hot herbs or the latter. So just to wrap that up, I would say the goal as an herbalist making products is to either make incredible or to spend that extra time educating your customers on how to make the best decisions for them. And then the biggest point that I want to make here too, I'm going to do a quick check-in. I'm going to just make sure that you guys can still see and hear me. So, the biggest thing that I want to make here and in a few other points later is that if you are considering selling products to people, you absolutely have to experience those products before you ever consider giving them to other people. You need to be able to know whether the formula that you've created is especially hot or especially drying. An example of that is goldenrod can be incredibly drying for some folks, and it can actually leave you constipated or having a hard time peeing with excessive use. Now, I don't want to scare anyone away from goldenrod. It doesn't always do that, but that's just an example. Some folks, it's too drying for them if they're already dry. But that's also why goldenrod works so well for sinuses. It helps, dry up those sniffles. So anyways, I really want to drive that home. I think at the very, very, very minimum, you should be trying a product for at least a month before you offer it to other people. And spend time with it. Ask yourself these questions so you know who you're targeting, who it's for, if it's balanced or not. I feel like that's something that's really missing in some people's practices, and I'm going to talk a lot more about this in a video I really want to make about capitalism and herbalism, because what other reason is there for someone to want to sell something that they've never experienced, they have no idea if it works, to other people before they experience it? What other reason could that be other than wanting to sell something? And that to me is missing the point. That is not a practice that I think belongs in herbalism. And I know for some folks, you get so excited about these things, you want to share it with other people, but you should be excited to experience that thing. And then if after experiencing it, it's changed your life or someone else's, or it's effective or it's amazing and you want to share it, by all means. The next question that's kind of on the same thing there is, after you have tinctures of each herb separately, how do you decide how to combine the tinctures together for your formula? This is a great question, and this, I just went into a lot of what I would normally say to answer this question. Questions that you should be asking yourself: who is this formula for? Is it for you, a family member, a client? Is it something you want to offer to the general public? What ailment is it for? You know what I mean? So typically, I do two things. A lot of times, if I'm traveling or I know that there's a new plant I want to try before its season is over, I will tincture it without knowing what I'm going to put it in. Other times, I have a formula in mind that I want to make for something, and then I tincture those herbs. So think about your formula that you want first. Do you want a formula for sleep, stomach problems, maybe heart palpitations, vomiting, diarrhea, etc.? And then think about the constitutions that come with those things. Would you want hot herbs in a formula for someone experiencing diarrhea or vomiting? Absolutely not. And again, these are the kinds of things that after taking my class on energetics, you can confidently walk away understanding those sort of constitutions that come with ailments, like I also mentioned with the eczema. So there's a lot of questions to ask yourself before you formulate. To me, I would have never understood formulation if I hadn't learned constitution and energetics first, because if you're not viewing a formula and a person and an ailment holistically, and you're thinking allopathically of like, this word or this herb works for this thing. Did I say the right word? Yeah. Then you're gonna come up with an incredibly jumbled formula. So if I just wrote down all the herbs that I know are generally good for pain, that would be a crazy formula. We don't want, total opposite energetics. We want just a mild, basic formula. So there's a lot of things that go into it. My rule of thumb is no more than 6 herbs in a formula. And reason being, let's look at a 1 ounce bottle here. How much can I fit in this bottle of more than 6 herbs? Not very much. And you want to be able to shake this bottle and get all 6 of those herbs in this one tiny dropper. So if you do too many herbs, you're not going to get the dose that you need of those herbs. And that's another important part of formulas, knowing whether the herbs that you're working with are high dose or low dose. For example, I make a tincture that I offer to folks with Lyme disease, and I give them the Baikal skullcap root separately because that is a very high dose medicine. So if I were to add that to the formula that I have for Lyme, I would need that bottle to be mostly Baikal skullcap root and just a tiny bit of all the other herbs. So that's another thing you have to think about. And I feel like folks get frustrated with like, well, how am I supposed to know? How do you just know whether an herb is high dose or low dose, or what alcohol you need to tincture it in, and for how long, and if it can go together, and blah, blah, blah. Experience is the only answer. There is no shortcuts in herbalism. So, I mean, of course, sure, there could be, you could have someone write all of this information down for you, but you will be referencing it for the rest of your life. In order to fully understand these things and to be able to start intuitively formulating and intuitively doing things, you have to understand it. And in order to understand it, you have to experience it. So just keep that in mind. Try not to feel rushed, and just remember that it's all about the experience. All right. We're really diving in here. We've got some good stuff coming up. This question says, I'm sure this will be discussed more in the topics you mentioned, but I would love to hear specifically how you navigate wildcrafting at scale. Do you focus more on finding lots of locations and foraging in a large area, or more intensively managing smaller areas? Now, I am going to get way more into this in the videos that I mentioned, because this is such a huge topic that I could spend at least another hour talking about it, and we're already 40 minutes in. So I'm going to just touch on some things first here. Let me catch up. So for me specifically, when I fell into my plant path, the thing that enthralled me the most was the plants that were around me, the plants that I could walk outside and experience them, sit with them, smell them, touch them, taste them. I wanted to know what everything was. And not everyone comes into herbalism that way. Some people could care less about identifying herbs, and they just want to formulate and help people. So that said, naturally, wildcrafting was of interest to me, because when you go outside and you realize that this herb has so much value for you, Of course you want to experience it, and you should experience it. It's how you do it and what comes after that that is so important, that we will talk about extensively in those videos. But I will tell you right now about my experience, and in the videos I will talk more about options for other people. So in my experience, I rent a large piece of land, not too large, we've got 8 acres, but I'm near public land that's being logged, which means I go and walk through the beautiful trails there, and I see all these incredible plant friends, and I know that they are going to be totally bulldozed within the next month or so. So I've spent a lot of my time since living out here transplanting what I can from that land and collecting seeds from other things there as well. And that was immediately a part of my practice, because one of our favorite times to go out and walk and enjoy nature is in the fall. And in the fall is when you see the most plants in that seed stage. They are so ready to drop those seeds. You can hear it when you walk. The seeds popping off and rattling out. So one of the first things I did, and I think this is a wonderful practice for lots of other people as well, I had a giant tub that I put some soil in, and when we would go out and go for walks, I would shake seeds into my hands, stick them in my pockets, and I would get home and I would toss them in this giant tub. And I still have that tub, and it's so beautiful watching it, spring, summer, fall, winter, all plants taking turns in this one tub. And that's exactly what we see happening, wildly in nature. So on our land, and I am wildcrafting plants on our land that were in nowhere near as much abundance when we moved here, and some of them that didn't exist at all. And maybe at this point, I would give that a different word, not so much wildcrafting. I'm definitely stewarding this land. I'm definitely influencing what has a place here and how much of a place. Another good example is we found a patch of blueberry bushes, wild blueberries, deep in our woods, totally canopied by trees. And wild blueberries, if they're in the deep woods and don't get much sunlight, are not going to fruit. Well, wild blueberries are a treasure, so we were not going to let that happen. So we have very dense woods. We are trimming those trees so those blueberries can have sunlight, and so they can start to spread. And hopefully when they begin to spread, saplings of trees will start to have less of a chance to mature. Because really, some areas we have more trees than we should have. Other areas we don't have enough trees. Does the planet have enough trees? No. But does that mean that I should have such a dense population of trees that plants don't have a chance of surviving on my land? No. That's not good either. We plant trees where trees need to be planted, but we also take away trees where there's too dense a population of them. And this is something that is talked about a lot in indigenous practices. There is a book that I mentioned in the last live Q&A about indigenous tribes on the California coast and their practices of land management. And this is something that they practice, is thinning trees, and they specifically mention a rule of thumb of having 13 trees per acre. Well, we have several times that. And so that said, it's also a constant battle here stewarding this land of making sure that Japanese honeysuckle and kudzu don't completely take over this entire property, and blackberry and sumac. Luckily we use all 4 of those things. And so that's another part of my practice, is I'm able to cut back these crazy invasive species and also incorporate those into the medicine that I make, while planting native seeds that are non-invasive and helping them spread and flourish. And this is something I mentioned in part 2 of the tier 3 and 4 plant walk for July, was how to harvest St. John's wort and other plants really in such a way that will help them continue to grow and flourish and have a better chance as a more fragile wildflower. And that's a really big part of it too. So in this book that I'm mentioning, and also in the book Braiding Sweetgrass, which is also primarily about indigenous practices, they talk about how the willow that's being used for weaving baskets and the sweetgrass that's being braided for burning and the boats that they're using to make canoes and all these plants and trees and bushes that they're using are actually growing way more than anywhere else on Turtle Island. And that might be seen as odd for someone who's like, well, there's no one harvesting sweetgrass in this area and it's not doing well. There's a whole tribe harvesting sweetgrass in this area and it's flourishing. How can that be? Well, if you don't just go and rip things out of the harvest carefully and you tend them and you observe their patterns in nature, then you can learn and understand what they need from you to flourish. And I know that there's a whole idea that nature doesn't need us, but that's not really true anymore. And I hate to break that to some of you. I do think that nature would eventually regenerate itself, but another point is that before colonizers were here, indigenous people all over this country were depending on plants for housing, for travel, for food, for trade, for clothing, for shoes, for absolutely everything. And therefore, they were influencing the plant life around them by harvesting it. And that created this very reciprocal relationship where the plants adapted with the humans. They were then like producing more, growing in new ways, cohabiting with other plants in new ways. And because the plants adapted to that, if they were to stop using them completely, well, it would not be great, because nature's been changing its ways. It's been adapting to being used and harvested. So then when that harvesting stops, it's going to be continuing to overproduce, but no one's going to be using it. That's not going to be a beautiful sight. And I've seen some information going around about this now, so hopefully this is something being discussed elsewhere. But wilderness, that word, was a word used by indigenous people to describe a piece of land that was not being taken care of by people for that reason. It had maybe been taken care of by people in the past and adapted to being harvested, and then people maybe migrated, and then that land turned into wilderness where it was overproducing. It was totally unmanageable, and for people to be able to inhabit that area, it would have taken a lot of work. So at this point, I like to think that we have created a very similar relationship on this land. So for me, my wildcrafting practices are focused much more on regeneration, and I'm also at a point now where I'm doing a lot for this land without expecting things in return. I'm helping plants that I will never use, such as golden seal and ginseng and wild ginger and a few others, pipsisua, plants that I don't use in my practice. I am helping to make sure that they can live here safely. And that is the most important thing. And that is giving back. Because giving is not expecting anything in return. So let's see what else I wrote here. Yeah, so another thing I wrote down is basically what I just said. Experience plants without feeling a need to harvest and profit. I think that's a really big mistake that people make when they first come into herbalism. And I'm going to talk about this a lot more in videos because I understand why it happens. It's incredibly exciting. When we first were really getting into this, we would come home with a ton of plants, things that grow really well here. And this is another thing I wanted to mention. We live in a community where I receive a text message, an email, a phone call at least once a week, sometimes much more than that, from neighbors in the area saying, I'm getting ready to trim this kudzu, do you want to come dig some up? I'm getting ready to trim this Japanese honeysuckle, do you want some? There is a man that owns a field near my home that is completely covered in yarrow. And he doesn't live there, he just owns it. So he pays someone to go and mow it occasionally. Well, now he lets me know before he does that. Thank goodness. And I can literally go there and harvest all the mullein I could ever imagine before they mow that field. So those are other things that you can do to ensure good practices. That's not the point I wanted to make. Let me see if I can get back on track. Oh, okay, so when we come home with a harvest like that, big, exciting, I would watch as my son, the way he felt was as though we were so rich. We were so wealthy. We had all this value in plants. And I completely understand that. And honestly, I love seeing him that way. But that, to me, is what's happening innocently to people coming into this who then become excited about offering it for sale. So I just want to remind people of the many other ways to experience plants without feeling like you have to harvest and profit from them. And another thing I wanted to mention, there is a company in Knoxville, and I think there's more popping up. I would love to start one here for reasons like that, public land that's being logged here, where I think it's something like United Plant Savers, but it's not the United Plant Savers, that's a different organization. But these people will go to places where a wild lot is being constructed for homes or apartments or whatever, and they will save these native plants and offer them to people to rehome them, like we are here, to create a safe environment for them, to ensure the life of these fragile native plants. Alright, I'm moving on to a series of questions from one person. I'm only going to answer just a couple of their questions, and I'll read the other ones because these are things, again, that will be in these videos that I mentioned in the future. So their first question was, what are your thoughts on cultural appropriation of medicine? That is an exact topic of one of the videos that I'll be doing, so I'm not going to focus on this question because we're already 10 minutes away from an hour. So their next question, how do you react to all the herbal companies out there buying herbs from Mountain Rose Herbs or similar places, mostly internationally grown plants, and just blending ingredients without ever intimately getting to know them? First, I want to make a disclaimer because I know a lot of you likely do buy herbs from Mountain Rose Herbs. There is nothing wrong with them. In fact, that is the best company that you could buy dried herbs from without going directly to a small-scale farm, which a lot of small-scale herb farms are popping up right now selling both fresh and dried herbs. So that would be my first recommendation. But Mountain Rose Herbs is a wonderful bulk company. But what this person is saying is just, what do you think about people only ever using dried herbs and buying from large corporate dried herb websites like Star West Botanicals, Mountain Rose Herbs, Herb Co., etc.? So let's get into it. I've got mixed feelings about this question because when I first started out, again, because I started out being enthralled with fresh live plants outside my back door, I didn't understand herbalists that didn't have that same connection. Now I understand that that's not possible for everyone, and it's actually quite important that some people do it that way. For example, I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with herbal street medics, but those are essentially people volunteering their time and medicine. Most of them are nonprofits and do get enough funding to buy herb ingredients, but they're not getting enough funds to seek out fresh, small-scale farmed herbs. They're getting enough funds to buy dried herbs from these big companies online, and to make as much medicine as they can as cheaply as possible, so they can go volunteer on the streets and get this medicine to the people who need it. Homeless populations, people in near natural disasters, like after the tornado relief here, what happened in Costa Rica earlier this year, Haiti, indigenous places, the Dakota pipeline access, we donated medicine there, etc. Those are times where we need those people to use those dried herbs. I also think a lot about herbalists in like Chicago and Manhattan and Los Angeles, because that is so radically different from my place in herbalism in my life. But we need them. Cities need herbalists too, So, let's see. So I do think that not experiencing the plants that you're working with is problematic, for reasons that I mentioned earlier, like how you really need to be experiencing things before you offer them to other people. But there are other ways to do this for city folks. If it were me, I would spend at least a month with a preparation of the herb, getting to know the energetics and constituents. I would also consider studying photos and researching that plant. For example, if I was an herbalist living in Brooklyn, Manhattan, wherever, and I couldn't go and learn on a farm or from my backyard, I think that I would probably either purchase essences from other herbalists, tinctures from other herbalists, buy those herbs and make those preparations myself. But I would spend a good month taking that, and I think this is why a lot of herbal courses like Chestnut School of Herbs, the American Herbalist Guild, all these places, they recommend that you learn one herb a month. And I used to think that was silly because I wanted to learn so much more than that at once. But the reason that they're saying that is because they want you to make a tea from that herb, a tincture from that herb, a spray from that herb, whatever. They want you to experience that herb and learn it from the inside out, know exactly how it works in the body, how it tastes, how strong it is, how effective it is. So that is one thing. I hope that herbalists who are primarily working with dried herbs from mass corporations are at least taking the time to get to know that herb. Another major thing for me is knowing the herb's environment. For example, if you watched the plant walk video where we went over jewelweed, jewelweed grows right next to a source of water. And it has these elbows in the stalk that are full of water, and they look like you could pierce them and water would come out. And there's also water nettle, which grows very similarly. If I had never seen those herbs in the wild and I just ordered them online, I would never know that. And to me, these herbs that need sources of water to live and they hold a lot of water, that's important information to know. So I also think if you are learning herbalism in that way, look up these plants, look at where they grow, look at some characteristics of them. Herbalism is just as much, if not much more so, an intimate experience with each plant as it is the people that you're giving them to. So, one more thing on this question. I do also wonder what angle of herbalism folks who cannot experience plants come into. I think it's a bit different. as I described earlier, I became enthralled by what was around me and how to use hyper-local plants. I think some folks come into it because they are seeking natural alternatives and want to help people, but then there are also folks who just want to profit off of a fad. And we see that a lot. For example, and this is the next question too. Actually, maybe I'll just read the next question and then go into it. The next question is, are there any red flags you notice on herbalists that do those sorts of practices and how we can avoid them? So the first thing I want to say is not everyone who makes natural products is an herbalist. Let that sink in, because Instagram has made it incredibly easy for our brain to see plants and natural products and register herbalist, and that is so not the case. If a person is not actively calling themselves an herbalist, they're probably not. A lot of natural product companies never touch plants. It took me a very long time to know that. And it was a hurtful thing, because I would see these big companies selling all-purpose salves, teas, etc. And they were big companies, like hundreds of thousands of followers, store locations, etc. And I'd be like, wow, why do people love these people so much? Like, what is it about them? Will I ever be that way? And then I learned that they are mass producing these products, they're marketing them, they're in all these like boutiques around the country, etc. Do you think that those people started a business because they cared about plants or helping people? No. And I've also just recently learned that there are, I guess I should have known that. Maybe you guys do. I just hadn't thought about it. There are warehouses where people formulate all these products for you. So you might sit at home and go, I want to be a natural product maker. You can type up, I'm going to make an all-purpose salve. People say that calendula is a great herb for that stuff. I see a lot of people using coconut oil and shea butter. All right, I'm going to make an all-purpose calendula salve. You email that ingredient list off to this company, and they do it for you. They source the herbs. They make it all for you. Long story short, those people are then never touching those plants. I do think that some people, where am I going with this? I have a friend who is a clinical herbalist, and she does not have the time to work with plants. I know that sounds crazy, but she has already done that before in her practice. At this point, she is seeing clients who need her knowledge, they need her care. So she sends off the formulas that she needs and has them made for her. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I'm specifically talking about is places that are pumping out and mass producing products to sell in Walmarts, Targets, etc. So things that you can look out for. I remember the first thing I noticed with a local company that you might look at and think that we were similar-ish. They do some CBD stuff and some skincare stuff. All of their products are white. All of their salves are white. And I was like, what the hell? How do you take plants, infuse them into wax, and it's white? No. That doesn't happen. So they're taking wax and oils and sprinkling essential oils of a plant into it. That is not the same. That is a huge red flag. For me, at least. Also, a big thing that I want to say is, where's the process? Are you seeing any plants on their pages or websites? Any photos of farms, harvesting practices, drying practices, infusing practices, straining practices? There is so much that goes into hand making a product that if you're seeing zero evidence of a handmade product, guarantee you they're not making it. Discussions, y'all know, we're doing it right now. I have a lot of discussions about plants, products, people, ailments, life, etc. I'm not saying that other people need to talk as much as I do, but like someone mentioned earlier about either educating your customers or making general products, you do need to educate your customers no matter what. You also need to explain some things. And typically an herbalist is going to take the time to talk about each plant, why it was chosen, what it does. You know what I mean? So those would be the red flags for me. Also, ask questions. Why not? Comment on a photo. Do you use whole plants or essential oils? Another question here. On the bookkeeping side, do you quantify things like wildcrafting and foraging? Do you pay yourself for that? Cultivating herbs I would factor in just like farm crops, but is it even necessary to include cost of foraging in the finances? First of all, I want to make something very, very clear. I do not wildcraft every herb I use at all by any means. This is another thing I'm going to be talking about majorly in a video for you all on how to grow sustainably. I used to do that, and I don't want to let go of certain like plants. There are some plants you can only get wild that cannot be cultivated, and those are so special. Also, there's a lot of wild plants where the cultivars are just not the same as the wild one. There's so many benefits to wild plants. I don't need to tell you guys. I'm sure a lot of you already know. So that said, I buy a lot of my plants from farms, local farms, farms that ship them to me fresh. We've got one of those people here on Patreon, Among the Oaks Farm, grows fresh or dried, freshly dried, herbs in Kentucky, and she ships them. So just throwing that out there. Anyways, first of all thing, I don't pay myself, y'all. I don't even know when I will start doing that, because right now and from the beginning, any money that comes into this business, aside from me surviving, I buy food, I pay rent, I pay utilities, I get my son what he needs to live happily, you know what I mean? Goat food, chicken food, we cover the basis. But we live very frugally, and I do not have like an allowance. Some businesses will give themselves that, and I will one day. But right now, I'm growing. I'm trying to do it the right way, and a lot of money is going into equipment, new labels, all this stuff. So just also throwing that out there. Also, I plan on retiring, or trying to, at 45, so before I pay myself to, I will likely put it into a fund somewhere. But to answer that question, absolutely not. I do not account for wild foraged plants. I do, in some places, account for my time. For example, I have never timed myself doing anything. I know some businesses do that, and I know I probably should, but I haven't. I would probably be sickened to know how much time I spend working. It's more than I will ever be able to factor into products, that's for sure. So I want to say that I factor in time, but it's a little different. I don't factor it into the final product. However, when I am retailing or wholesaling, like let's say I'm selling a bulk tincture or a bulk oil or CBD to another business, yes, I will factor in time into that. But when I'm selling products publicly to you all, I'm mostly accounting for ingredients, supplies, the container, labels, the shipping, packaging, and all that kind of stuff. So, no. And, you know, it's interesting. This question is interesting because I have an accountant now. I got a bookkeeper in January, and I hadn't been doing bookkeeping before then. And he is asking me to account for a lot of things that I've never accounted for, which is great. But even still, it feels odd to put a value on something wild. So I would say account for your time by all means if that's feasible for what you do. I know the person who asked this question farms, so you probably have a great idea of the labor that goes into harvesting a plant, and how much more that is than the actual plant itself. So that would be my way of looking at it, is how much time goes into harvesting and tending these plants. Another interesting thing is the wild tending that I do, I would be doing anyways. And that's a tricky thing with taxes, just like gardening, on taxes. Another thing I do want to point out though, because I know a lot of folks here are either business owners or aspiring to be, in the beginning of my business, the very, very beginning, I was of the mindset, I'm wildcrafting everything. Therefore, I have very low cost. The only cost I have is the containers and the oil or alcohol. And boy, was I selling myself short, because I signed up with this retailer, my first retailer, of that mindset. And so I was selling them this incredible product where I was wild foraging every ingredient and changing those ingredients out seasonally and spending so much time and love in this product and selling it for the bare minimum. And there were those there mass producing products charging 5 times as much as me for never even touching the plants, never even learning them. So I will say one thing I've learned is, when you spend as much time as I do educating yourself and investing in just knowledge and good practices and tending land and all those things, even though I don't account for it exactly, I do know my worth now, and that is incredibly important that someone would have told me that in the beginning, because it was a lot harder to say, hey guys, I'm working my butt off and I'm offering you something that you can't get anywhere else, and it is worth so much more than what I quoted you 2 years ago. So this was last year, 3 years ago, I don't know how many years ago, it doesn't matter. So actually, I'm gonna need to start charging you this. It makes sense, right? I'm a more legitimate business now. I have new labels, new containers, nicer oils. I'm purchasing the herbs from farms now. Those people dropped me and said, we don't want to raise the price on our customers. Then they turned around and started purchasing mass-produced the product I was selling them, basically, and slapped their labels on it and sold it for more than they were selling mine for. And I hate that my little soul had to go through that bullshit. So hopefully that reaches some of the right people. This is an interesting question, and we're getting towards the end here, so if anyone has questions, pop them in. I would love to learn how migraines work, what to do to prevent it and reduce symptoms. Now, this is interesting because we still don't have quite enough research done on migraines, but we have in the past 5 years come to learn a new part of it that has been proven, whereas everything before was merely theories. And so one thing we do know about migraines is that they occur when hormonal changes happen. So when your serotonin or your estrogen or your testosterone is changed in any way, it can cause a migraine depending on what changed it and how severely. So that's a very important thing to focus on. This is why when some people are around perfume. I have a friend who's incredibly sensitive. When she's out in public, if she gets a strong whiff of someone's crappy perfume that's disrupting her hormones, that's what's actually happening, she is done for the rest of the day with a migraine. So that's why there's all these weird triggers for migraines. Yogurt, foods, smells, skincare products, chlorine, tap water, all these things can mess with your hormones or your serotonin levels and cause migraines. So my biggest recommendation, much before herbs, for anyone who experiences migraines would be to document exactly what you did that day, where you went, what you ate, where you are in your menstrual cycle, if you wore perfume or if someone around you wore perfume or cologne or anything like that. Essential oils are big hormones, so that's another big one.